Chapter 36. The Aridi soldiers were disarmed and made to sit on the ground, surrounded by over 100 Tuolagi warriors. Selathan, the 4 Araluans, and Svengel were led to one side. Their hands were bound in front of them, and they watched as Usal and 2 of his officers walked among the seated Aridi troopers. "I could kill you all now," he told them. "You know that. But instead, I'm going to be merciful." Holt watched skeptically. "And he knows that if he started killing them, they'd fight back," he said in an aside to Evanlyn. "Even though they're unarmed, he'd lose some of his own men." Men who were certain they were going to die would fight desperately to the end, he knew. But if there was a ray of hope, no matter how faint, they would take it. "I'll keep your horses," Usal continued, "and we'll take your boots. Then you can go." Selathan started forward angrily, but a Tuolagi sentry restrained him. "Go? Go where?" he shouted. The tall war leader turned towards him, the eyes above the blue mask devoid of any sign of mercy. He shrugged. "That's not my concern," he said harshly. "I didn't ask these men to follow me. You did. If I leave them now in the desert, that's on your head, not mine. At least I'm giving them a chance." "What chance will they have in the desert without water?" Selathan challenged, and Usal spread his hands in a sarcastic gesture. "Did I say they would be left without water?" he asked. "I said I'd keep their boots and their horses. I don't want them following us. But the word of law says we must never turn a traveller out in the desert without water. Of course they will have water." He gestured to one of his men. "Give them 2 water skins," he said. "For over 30 men, and some of them wounded? This isn't what the law means, and you know it, you murderer." Usal shrugged. "Unlike you, I don't pretend to know God's will, Silay El Fen. The word of law says a stranger must be given water. I don't recall an amount being mentioned." Selathan shook his head bitterly. "No wonder you're the forgotten of God, Usal," he said. The Tuolagi flinched at the insult, as if he had been whipped. He turned and gave a curt order to his men, and there was a ringing sound of steel as 100 swords were drawn and raised over the defenceless Aridi troops. "Your choice, then, Silay El Fen. Give the word, and my men will kill the prisoners now. Or would you rather they have my mercy?" His hand was raised to give the command. The muscles in Selathan's jaw knotted as he tried to control his rage and frustration. One of the troops, a lieutenant, looked up and called to the Wakir. "Excellence, don't worry about us. We'll be all right. We'll find help and come after you." Usal laughed. "How brave. Perhaps I should kill this one. I wouldn't like to think that such a fierce warrior was dogging my footsteps." He stepped close to the young officer and drew his own sword. The Aridi looked up at him defiantly. "Your choice, Silay El Fen," Usal repeated. Selathan made a small gesture of defeat. "Let them live," he said quietly, and Usal laughed again. "I thought you might change your mind." He gave another hand gesture to his own men, and their weapons were sheathed. Then he leaned down to the young Aridi who had spoken. His eyes, dark and cruel as those of a bird of prey, bored into the soldiers. "You're brave enough now, boy," he said in a quiet, bitter voice. "But wait till your tongue is dry and swollen so large that it fills your throat so that you can hardly breathe. Wait till your feet are torn and blistered by the heat and the rocks. Your eyes will be blinded by the glare of the sun, and you'll wish your leader had allowed me to kill you here and now. Believe me, he's done you no favor today." The young man's defiant gaze dropped from Usal's. The Tuolagi war leader snorted in contempt. "Turn them out into the desert." Then, to the guards who were gathered round Holt, Selathan and the others, he ordered, Bring these ones to the camp. He turned away, strode to his horse, mounted, and rode off towards the crest without a backwards glance. The guards moved in on the small party of hostages. 4 of them surrounded Svengel, and 2 more stationed themselves behind him. Obviously, their dealings with Erak had taught them what to expect from the wild sea wolves. Before Svengel could resist, one of the men behind him struck him across the back of the knees with the haft of his spear. The Scandian's legs collapsed under the unexpected blow, and he fell to the ground. Instantly, the 4 were upon him, hobbling his legs with leather thongs so that he could only shuffle along, taking half steps. Then they dragged the big man to his feet again. He glared at them, the rage boiling up inside him. But the sight of the drawn daggers that surrounded him was enough to calm him down. There was no point to suicide, he realized. Another guard stepped forward and dragged Evelyn out of the group. Horace went to intercept him, but a spear butt rammed into his stomach stopped him in his tracks. He sagged to his knees, gasping for breath. "The girl is a valuable hostage," Holt warned the guard. "Yusal won't thank you if she's harmed." The man hesitated. In fact, he had only been interested in the necklace that Evelyn wore. He seized it now and dragged her off balance as he examined it. But the rounded stones threaded onto the string were worthless marble. "Keep them," he snarled. "They're worth nothing." He shoved her back with the others, then gave a brisk order. The guards mounted and herded their captives on foot towards the camp, their hands tied tightly before them with leather thongs. Urged on by spear butts and curses, they stumbled on the uneven ground. One of the guards rode close to Gillen. He had lost 3 friends to the Rangers' arrows during the attack that morning, and he took every opportunity now to crack his spear shaft painfully across the Rangers' shoulders and back. The 4th time he did so, Gillen turned and looked up at him with a peculiar smile. "What are you looking at, foreigner?" the guard demanded roughly. The smile was a little unsettling. A prisoner shouldn't smile at his captors like that, he thought. "I'm just making sure I can remember you," Gillen told him. "Never know when that might be useful." The spear cracked down across his shoulders. He flinched, then nodded meaningfully at the Tuolagi rider before he began plodding up the hill once more. Erak looked up as the hostages were thrust unceremoniously onto the ground beside him. As Gillen had observed some nights earlier, he was seated on the ground, chained between 2 noisy, complaining camels. His face was bruised and his hair matted with dried blood. One eye was almost closed, and there were whip scores on his arms and back. "Well, look at what the cat dragged in," he said cheerfully. "What brings you here, Holt?" "We've come to rescue you," Holt told him, and the Obial looked quizzically at the leather bindings that secured his friends. "You've taken a strange way to do it," he said. Then, as he recognized Selethan, his brows contracted into an unfriendly frown. "Nice work, Wakir," he said. There was an overtone of bitterness in his voice as he held up his own manacled hands. Selethan shook his head. His own bitterness matched Erak's. "This was not what I intended. I lost a lot of good men," he told the Scandian. Erak considered the statement for a moment, then his expression softened, and he nodded. He glanced at Svengel. "Svengel, my friend," he said, "when I told you to go and get the Araluans, this isn't exactly what I had in mind." Svengel shrugged. "Don't worry, Chief. We've got these Tuolagi surrounded. From the inside." "Exactly," Erak replied dryly. Then he gestured to the stony ground. "Take a seat, why don't you?" As the others sat, Evelyn knelt beside the Obial. Gently, she examined the wounds to his scalp and the massive bruise around his eye. "Are you all right, Erak?" she asked. He shrugged. "Oh, I'm fine. They never hurt you so badly that you can't walk. And they're treating me like an honored guest. A handful of moldy dates, some stale bread, and a mouthful of water, then a nice walk in the sunshine. Who could ask for more? Any word of Toshak so far? Holt asked. Erak's expression darkened. Not by name, but that swine Yusal hinted that I'd be meeting a countryman soon, and I don't think he meant you, Svengel. I can't wait. If I get a chance to get my hands on Toshak's throat, he'll wish he'd never been born. He looked up at Holt, then, unlike you to be taken by surprise, Holt. Are you losing your edge? Holt raised an eyebrow at him. From what I've heard, you didn't do so well yourself at Al-Shabaab, he pointed out, and Erak shrugged ruefully. I guess we're all getting careless, he said. Any idea where this bunch is headed, Chief? Svengel asked. They don't exactly consult me. I just drag along behind Matilda there. He jerked a thumb at the nearest of the two camels. We've become quite fond of each other, he added, glaring balefully at the grumbling beast. Odds are we're headed for the northern massif, Selathan said, and Erak looked at him with interest. I believe I did hear those words mentioned, he said. Well, you'd better get some rest while you can. It's a long day when you're walking. Horace scratched his ear, the movement made clumsy by the fact that his hands were tied together. What time do they feed us? He asked. Erak looked at him for a second, then grinned. Don't ever change, Horace, he said.